The sun was shining brightly over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped lazily from the trees lining the streets, and the air carried the gentle scent of freshly mowed lawns. The houses here were large, each with neatly trimmed hedges and sparkling windows. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved to each other from across the street, and where everyone seemed to know everyone else. At least that was the picture on the surface. In the middle of this picturesque area was a house that immediately caught attention. It was bigger than most of the others, with tall pillars at the entrance, wide glass windows, and a pool that reflected the sunlight like a small mirror. This house belonged to a man who had worked tirelessly for years to get to this point. He was a businessman who had started from almost nothing, building a life brick by brick, step by step. He believed in hard work, patience, and staying focused on what mattered most. After years of long hours, late nights, and countless sacrifices, he finally had a home that reflected his success. But more than that, it was a place where he could relax, feel safe, and enjoy life on his own terms. It was early afternoon, and the man had decided to take a break from his usual busy schedule. He had put on his swim trunks and stepped into the pool, feeling the cool water wash over him. There was a sense of freedom in these moments. No phones, no emails, no meetings, just the gentle movement of water and the warmth of the sun. He floated on his back, closing his eyes, letting the stress of the week melt away. For him, these were rare moments of peace, moments where he could truly breathe. Across the street, one of the neighbors was peeking through their blinds. This neighbor had lived in the neighborhood for many years and had grown used to the familiar routines and faces. There was comfort in knowing what to expect every day, and the sudden appearance of someone new, someone different, made them uneasy. When they first saw the man in the pool, a small voice of doubt began whispering in their mind. Why was he swimming in the afternoon? Why didn't he look like the rest of the people around here? Their imagination quickly filled in a story that made them nervous, a story that painted the man as someone out of place, someone suspicious. Without stopping to think or ask questions, the neighbor reached for their phone. They called the local authorities, their voice tight with worry and an undercurrent of judgment. They explained what they thought was happening, describing the man in the pool in a way that made the situation sound urgent. They didn't pause to consider that this man could simply be enjoying his own property, that he might be a successful professional, or that he had every right to be there. Their mind was already convinced that something was wrong, and they wanted someone else to handle it. Meanwhile, the man in the pool remained unaware of the call. He was lost in the rhythm of his swimming, feeling the water move around him, feeling the sunlight on his face. He thought about the work he had done to get here, the obstacles he had overcome, and the moments when he almost gave up. This house, this pool, and this neighborhood were his reward. Every drop of sweat, every sacrifice, every late night, it had all led to this. He smiled to himself, feeling a quiet pride in the life he had built. The tension started to build slowly, though he didn't know it yet. He heard the faint sound of cars approaching, the kind of sound that was familiar in a neighborhood but this time carried a different weight. He looked up and saw 2 police cars pull up at the curb. Officers stepped out, their expressions a mix of caution and professionalism. They walked toward his property, their eyes scanning, trying to understand what they might be walking into. He stepped out of the pool dripping wet and greeted them calmly, his tone polite and measured. He had learned long ago that keeping calm in tense situations often made the biggest difference. The neighbor across the street watched eagerly, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. They had made the call, and now it seemed like something important was happening. They squinted through the blinds, trying to see what would happen next. In their mind, they had already built a story about confrontation, about justice being served, about them being right. But life rarely fits neatly into the stories we tell ourselves. As the officers approached the house, the man introduced himself. He spoke clearly, answering questions and explaining that this was his property, that he had lived there for some time, and that there was no threat. He offered to provide identification and paperwork if needed, a gesture of transparency and respect. He could sense the tension in the officers, the uncertainty that comes when people expect one thing and find another. He remained patient, understanding that their caution was part of their job. The officers nodded, taking note of his calm demeanor and clear explanations. They began to understand that their initial assumptions were incorrect, that the situation was nothing like the neighbor had imagined. It was a moment of realization for them, a subtle reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that jumping to conclusions can lead to unnecessary worry. The man's composure, his quiet confidence, and his polite but firm responses slowly changed the energy of the scene. Back across the street, the neighbor began to sense that something was off. The man in the pool wasn't acting as they expected. He wasn't aggressive, threatening, or suspicious. He was calm, confident, and in complete control of his environment. The neighbor's assumptions started to crumble, replaced by confusion and a hint of embarrassment. They hadn't anticipated that the man would be successful, that he would own such a magnificent home, or that he would handle the situation with such grace. Their mind raced, trying to reconcile what they had imagined with the reality unfolding before them. The man watched as the officers made their rounds, checking the property and confirming the information. He offered small gestures of hospitality, inviting them to ask any questions, to take a closer look if needed. He didn't raise his voice, didn't show frustration, and didn't demand respect. He simply allowed the truth to speak for itself. In doing so, he demonstrated something powerful, that dignity, patience, and clarity can often diffuse situations before they escalate. The neighborhood, which had seemed so quiet and predictable, was now a stage for a lesson in perception and prejudice. One person's assumptions had triggered a chain of events, but the calm presence of the man in the pool transformed the moment into something instructive. It was a reminder that the stories we tell ourselves about others can be misleading, and that understanding and empathy often require us to pause, observe, and question our own biases. As the afternoon sun continued to shine, the man returned to his pool, taking a moment to reflect. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the work, the sacrifices, and the patience it had required. He felt a sense of calm satisfaction, knowing that he could enjoy his life without letting the assumptions of others disturb his peace. He floated once more, letting the water cradle him, feeling the warmth of the sun and listening to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood. Life was full of challenges and misunderstandings, but it was also full of opportunities to show strength, grace, and humanity. The neighbor watched from their window, a mixture of emotions crossing their face. There was surprise, discomfort, and the beginnings of self-reflection. The man in the pool had not reacted with anger or confrontation, yet his presence and calm confidence spoke louder than any words could. It was a moment that would linger, a small but significant lesson about assumptions, bias, and the power of composure. By the time the officers left, satisfied that everything was in order, the neighborhood returned to its quiet rhythm. The man remained in his pool, feeling a quiet triumph not in confrontation, but in the simple act of being himself and living his life fully. The afternoon carried on warm and bright, but with a subtle shift in energy, a reminder that appearances are often deceiving and that patience, dignity, and resilience can turn moments of tension into opportunities for understanding. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the man finally climbed out of the pool, wrapping himself in a towel and heading inside. He felt refreshed, not just from the swim but from the awareness that he had handled a difficult moment with grace. The neighborhood, with its quiet streets and familiar faces, would continue to be a place of observation and learning. And in his heart, he knew that true peace came not from others recognizing his worth, but from knowing it himself and living in alignment with his values. Today had been a small but meaningful reminder of that truth, and he carried it with him as he settled into the comfort of his home. The afternoon grew warmer, and the sunlight bounced off the water in the pool like tiny sparks of gold. The man had finished drying off and had gone inside to get a glass of water. He was calm, composed, and aware that the encounter with the police had ended without conflict. Despite this, he knew that the moment would leave ripples in the neighborhood that might not settle quickly. Life had taught him that people often made quick judgments without knowing the full story, and it wasn't always easy to change their minds. Across the street, the neighbors still stood by their window. Their fingers tapped nervously against the glass as they replayed the scene in their mind. The man in the pool, confident and composed, had shattered the narrative they had built in their own mind. There was no threat, no wrongdoing, only someone living life as he pleased on his own property. Yet pride and prejudice are stubborn companions, and admitting a mistake wasn't easy. A small part of them wanted to apologize, but another part clung to the discomfort, the embarrassment that now pricked at their ego. They felt unsettled, unsure how to process what they had witnessed. Meanwhile, the man went about his afternoon routine, trying not to dwell on the incident. He poured himself a glass of water, placed it on the kitchen counter, and looked out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn that stretched in front of his house. He appreciated the quiet beauty of the neighborhood and the life he had built. Owning this mansion wasn't just about wealth. It was about security, freedom, and having a space where he could enjoy the fruits of his hard work. Every detail, from the polished floors to the clear blue pool, reminded him of the journey that had brought him here. As the day wore on, he decided to check on some unfinished business. He needed to review documents related to his investments, but the peaceful atmosphere of the mansion made it easy to focus without the usual distractions of a busy city office. He spread out the papers on a large table near the window, sunlight streaming in and casting long shadows across the pages. Every number, every decision, and every calculation mattered. It was a reminder that his success wasn't by chance. It was a product of careful planning, relentless effort, and resilience in the face of setbacks. Outside, the neighbor continued to observe. Their curiosity had shifted from suspicion to a cautious interest. They noticed how composed the man was, how confident yet humble his demeanor seemed, and how effortlessly he commanded respect without demanding it. There was a strange mixture of resentment and admiration forming in their mind. The neighbor had called the police expecting drama, but what they saw instead was grace under pressure, a calmness that highlighted their own anxious assumptions. The police officers who had come earlier lingered for a short while longer in the neighborhood. They made a few routine stops on their way out, but the memory of the mansion and its owner stayed with them. They shared quick professional comments with one another about how easily a situation can be misunderstood, and how important it is to approach every call with caution and an open mind. The encounter reminded them that appearances are often misleading, and that a person's presence, race, or age doesn't define their character or actions. Back in the house, the man decided to spend some time in the garden. He walked barefoot across the soft grass, feeling it tickle his toes. He appreciated the details that made this space his own. The fragrant flowers lining the pathway, the neat arrangement of shrubs, and the small fountain that added a soothing soundtrack of running water. He thought about how important it was to create an environment that nurtured both body and mind. Success wasn't just measured by money, but by the quality of life, peace of mind, and ability to enjoy simple pleasures. As he wandered through the garden, he reflected on the morning and the sudden confrontation with prejudice. He understood that this was not a personal attack. Rather, it was a reflection of the neighbor's fear of the unknown. Many people reacted defensively when faced with what they didn't understand, and assumptions often filled the gaps in their knowledge. He didn't feel anger, but he did feel a sense of responsibility, not to punish but to demonstrate through his actions the values he held dear. He decided to take a break and sit near the fountain. He watched the water ripple and sparkle in the sunlight, letting the sound calm his thoughts. Life had its challenges, he knew, but it also had moments like this. Moments where clarity and patience could turn a situation from tension to understanding. He thought about the ways people reacted differently to those who were different from themselves, and how much the world could improve if people paused before making judgments. Later, he went back inside and prepared a simple meal. Cooking was another way he found peace. He chopped vegetables, stirred sauces, and set the table with care. The kitchen smelled wonderful, a mix of herbs and spices that brought warmth to the room. Eating alone wasn't lonely. It was a quiet celebration of his achievements and a reminder that he had created a life filled with choice and freedom. Each bite was a moment of gratitude for the journey, the hard work, and the lessons learned along the way. The afternoon shadows grew longer, and the light in the house shifted to a warm, golden hue. He sat back in his chair and thought about the interaction with the neighbor and the officers. While it could have escalated into conflict, it had not. His calm approach had turned potential tension into understanding. He realized that his own demeanor could influence the outcome of situations more than anger or confrontation ever could. This wasn't just about one afternoon. It was about living life in a way that stayed true to his principles and allowed him to navigate challenges with dignity. Across the street, the neighbor closed the blinds slowly. They had spent hours replaying the events, analyzing their own behavior and the man's response. It was uncomfortable, yes, but it was also a moment of reflection. For the first time, They wondered if their assumptions were fair, if they had judged someone based on nothing more than fear and prejudice. It was a quiet internal shift, and while it might take time for full understanding to emerge, the seed had been planted. As evening approached, the man stepped outside once more. He took a deep breath, enjoying the cool breeze and the soft sounds of the neighborhood settling into night. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows and painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It was a moment to pause, to appreciate the beauty around him, and to reflect on the small victories that life often presented. Handling the day with patience and composure had been a quiet triumph, one that reinforced the strength of his character. He knew that life would continue to challenge him in unexpected ways. People would make assumptions and misunderstandings would arise, but he also knew that how he responded mattered far more than what others thought. Each decision to remain calm, to act with dignity, and to approach situations with empathy was a small act of strength that could ripple outward, influencing others in ways they might not even realize. The neighborhood settled into its evening rhythm. Lights flickered on in other houses, cars returned from errands, and the gentle hum of conversation floated through the air. The man returned inside, closing the doors behind him and feeling the comforting sense of security that came with owning a home that was truly his. He moved through the rooms with ease, each space a testament to his efforts and achievements, each corner a reminder of how far he had come. Before bed, he took one last walk through the garden. The fountain glimmered under the soft glow of outdoor lights. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and the night air carried a sense of calm and possibility. He smiled to himself, thinking about the events of the day, the neighbors' assumptions, and the lesson that had quietly unfolded. Life was full of moments like this. Moments where the right attitude could turn tension into understanding, assumptions into awareness, and misunderstanding into reflection. Finally, he went inside feeling a quiet contentment. He knew tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities, but he felt prepared, grounded, and at peace. The day had started with tension and suspicion, but it had ended with calm, clarity, and reflection. He was reminded that living a life of patience, dignity, and confidence wasn't just a personal choice. It was a way to influence the world around him, subtly but powerfully. And with that thought, he settled in for the night, ready to face whatever came next with the same calm strength that had carried him through the day. The next morning, the sunlight poured into the mansion through the large glass windows, casting warm patterns across the polished floors. The man woke up early, as he usually did, enjoying the quiet before the neighborhood came to life. The events of the previous day had left a small mark on his mind, not because he was upset, but because he understood how easily people could make assumptions and jump to conclusions. He believed that every encounter, even difficult ones, could teach a lesson if approached thoughtfully. He prepared a simple breakfast in the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air. The routine comforted him, grounding him before he attended to the day ahead. While eating, he glanced out the window at the pool, reflecting on the previous afternoon. The officers had left after confirming his identity, and the neighbor had retreated behind their blinds, seemingly unsure how to process what had happened. Despite their assumptions, the world had continued peacefully, and the man had remained calm, his composure a quiet testimony to his patience and discipline. After breakfast, he decided to go back to the pool. There was something meditative about the water, and he found clarity in the gentle movements and reflections. As he dipped into the pool, the cool water embraced him, washing away the residual tension of the prior incident. He swam slowly, letting each stroke carry away lingering thoughts. In the solitude of the morning, he considered the impact of appearances, prejudice, and misunderstandings on daily life. Life had a way of teaching lessons subtly, often through ordinary moments that became extraordinary upon reflection. Across the street, the neighbor had begun to move around their house. Their curiosity had shifted into a nervous determination to understand what they had misjudged. They peeked through the blinds again, this time paying closer attention to the man in his pool. It wasn't just the fact that he owned the mansion that surprised them. It was the ease, dignity, and quiet authority he exuded. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture calm and controlled. For the first time, the neighbor felt the weight of their own assumptions, a growing discomfort as they realized that fear and prejudice had clouded their judgment. The man noticed the subtle movements from across the street, though he didn't let it disturb his peace. He understood human nature, knew that assumptions often came from fear, and recognized that people needed time to adjust when confronted with reality that didn't match their expectations. He swam for a while longer, then climbed out and sat on the edge of the pool, letting the sun warm his face. There was power in being seen without reacting, in allowing others to confront their own biases in their own time. A few hours later, he received a visit from the local police officers. They had come by not with suspicion, but to follow up and ensure everything was well. Their approach was professional and courteous, a sign that they had reflected on the previous day's events. The man greeted them warmly, inviting them to sit at the outdoor patio where the sunlight was pleasant, and the view of the garden and pool created a calm atmosphere. As they spoke, the officers asked questions not about suspicion, but about the community and the man's experiences. He explained his journey, his beginnings, the challenges he had faced, and how he had built his success. He spoke with humility, acknowledging the hard work and sacrifices, yet there was a quiet pride in his words. The officers listened attentively, their expressions shifting from formal courtesy to genuine interest and admiration. They could see clearly now that the man's presence in the neighborhood was a story of accomplishment, not a source of concern. The conversation turned gently toward the neighbor who had called them. The man chose his words carefully, not to embarrass or criticize, but to convey understanding. He noted that fear often led people to act prematurely, and that assumptions could mislead even the most well-intentioned individuals. He emphasized patience, empathy, and the importance of engaging with others rather than reacting solely on first impressions. The officers nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his calm reflections. This wasn't a lesson in authority, but a subtle demonstration of dignity and perspective. Later that morning, the man decided to take a walk around his property. The mansion's extensive grounds allowed him a peaceful stroll among the flowers, the shrubs, and the softly running fountain. He observed every detail with appreciation, the careful alignment of the garden paths, the gentle sway of trees in the breeze, and the interplay of sunlight and shadow on the grass. Walking these paths reminded him of the discipline and patience required to build a life, both materially and personally. It was a reminder that every effort, no matter how small, contributed to the larger picture of one's life. From across the street, the neighbor watched quietly. Their earlier confidence had been replaced by introspection. They noticed how naturally the man moved through his space, how calm he remained, and how he didn't react with anger or frustration. It was a striking contrast to the assumptions and anxiety that had led them to make that call in the first place. The neighbor felt a quiet embarrassment, but also a curiosity they couldn't ignore. This was someone they had misjudged, and the truth of his character was undeniable. The man paused on his walk, leaning against the edge of the garden fountain. He reflected on the subtle lessons embedded in everyday life, that dignity, composure, and patience often made a stronger impression than words or confrontation. He understood that people often needed time to reconcile their assumptions with reality, and that sometimes the most powerful response was simply to live in accordance with one's values. He smiled to himself, content that he had navigated the situation without conflict and had demonstrated, through his behavior, the strength of character that defined him. Around midday, he returned to the house to handle some work. He reviewed business matters, checked documents, and responded to emails with careful attention. Even in these tasks, he found calm focus, treating every detail with the respect and thoroughness it deserved. He understood that success required consistency, and that the lessons from yesterday would carry forward into how he conducted his life and his interactions. Every small action reinforced the principles that had allowed him to reach this point, and every choice reflected the patience and composure he valued. Meanwhile, the neighbor began to stir internally. They moved away from the window, sitting quietly in their living room reflecting on the morning. They thought about their assumptions, the fear that had prompted their actions, and the reality they had observed. There was a discomfort in admitting they were wrong, but also a growing sense of humility. The man's calm and dignified behavior had created an unavoidable contrast to their own judgment, and it was clear that their perspective needed reconsideration. Reflection, though uncomfortable, was necessary for growth. By afternoon, the man decided to entertain a small gathering of close friends at the house. Not out of showmanship, but to enjoy company and share moments of laughter and conversation. He prepared light refreshments and invited a few people who appreciated calm and meaningful interactions. As his friends arrived, they marveled at the mansion and the serene pool area. But more than the material aspects, they admired the atmosphere, the sense of peace, respect, and dignity that seemed to permeate every corner. The man's composure was contagious, and even casual conversations felt thoughtful and genuine. From their house across the street, the neighbor watched the small gathering. They couldn't help but notice the warmth, laughter, and respect among the visitors. It was an environment completely different from the assumptions they had built in their mind, a place of calm, inclusion, and positive energy. The realization sank in further that fear and prejudice could blind a person to the reality of who someone truly was. The neighbor felt a mix of emotions, discomfort, curiosity, and perhaps a faint hope that understanding was possible. As the day progressed, the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the mansion grounds. The man concluded his gathering, walking slowly along the paths and reflecting on the day. He had navigated the unexpected tension of yesterday with patience, and today had provided moments of reaffirmation. People had seen the truth through his behavior, and the lesson of patience and dignity had quietly unfolded. He understood that life offered opportunities to teach and inspire, not through confrontation, but through example. By evening, the neighborhood had settled into a calm rhythm. Lights flickered on, and a gentle breeze carried the sounds of daily life. The man sat quietly near the pool, watching the water ripple under the fading sunlight. The experiences of the past 2 days replayed in his mind, each interaction offering insights into human nature, the power of assumptions, and the strength of composure. He felt content, knowing that he had not only handled a difficult situation with grace, but had also left subtle impressions that could encourage reflection and growth in others. From across the street, the neighbor closed their blinds slowly, their thoughts a mix of reflection and acknowledgement. They couldn't deny the impression left by the man's calm and dignified presence. The day had offered a subtle but unmistakable lesson about assumptions, prejudice, and the power of patience. Though change might take time, the seed of understanding had been planted, and that realization was difficult to ignore. As night fell, the man returned inside, feeling a deep sense of peace. He had turned a situation fraught with tension into a series of quiet lessons. The day had unfolded without conflict, yet with clarity, dignity, and reflection that could influence the community subtly but profoundly. Settling into the calm of his home, he appreciated the lessons of patience, empathy, and quiet confidence. Life was a series of moments like these, moments that tested assumptions, challenged perspectives, and revealed the true nature of character. And in each of those moments, he knew he had acted in a way that reflected his values, leaving a quiet but lasting impression on those around him. The morning sun cast a soft glow over the mansion, making the pool sparkle and the garden leaves shimmer. The man woke early as he always did, enjoying the quiet that came before the neighborhood fully stirred. After the events of the past few days, he felt a sense of calm and clarity. Life had a way of testing patience and composure, and he had handled each challenge with dignity. Today he intended to continue living as he always had, focused on his work, his home, and the small joys of life. He started the day with a walk through the garden. The fragrance of the flowers mingled with the fresh morning air, creating a peaceful atmosphere. He moved slowly along the stone pathways, noticing the details he had so carefully arranged. The curve of a hedge, the gentle flow of the fountain, and the way sunlight fell through the branches of the trees. Every aspect of the garden was a reflection of his care and effort, and he felt a quiet pride in the life he had built. These were the kinds of spaces that allowed him to think clearly, to breathe, and to face challenges without stress. As he approached the pool, he noticed something unusual. The neighbor from across the street was outside, tending to their own lawn, and their eyes kept glancing in his direction. It was clear they were curious, perhaps even unsettled by the way he had conducted himself over the past few days. He smiled slightly, choosing to acknowledge their presence with a gentle nod, a simple gesture of civility that spoke volumes without words. He knew that patience and kindness could sometimes teach lessons more effectively than confrontation or anger. After a few moments, he returned inside to prepare for the day's work. He had several meetings to attend virtually, and a number of documents to review. His office was a quiet space filled with natural light and the minimal distractions that allowed him to focus. Sitting at his desk, he methodically went through each task, careful to give full attention to every detail. Success had taught him that discipline and patience were crucial, not only in business but in life itself. How one handled small moments often determined the outcome of larger ones. By late morning, the neighbor had moved closer, seemingly drawn by curiosity. From their porch, they watched as he moved through the property with ease, handling everyday tasks with calm authority. Their posture shifted slightly, a mixture of discomfort and growing awareness. They had misjudged the man, assuming he was merely an outsider or someone out of place. The reality was far different. He was composed, confident, and clearly respected by anyone who interacted with him. The neighbor's mind began to process this quietly, though unease lingered. There was no one to blame but themselves, and that recognition was uncomfortable. The man decided to take a break and stepped back outside. The warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze provided comfort, and he felt renewed as he settled near the pool with a book. Reading allowed him to reflect on ideas and stories that reminded him of the broader perspective on life. Today he chose passages that spoke about patience, understanding, and the subtle ways people influenced one another. Every page offered insights that resonated with his own experiences, reinforcing the lessons he had recently applied in real life. Later, a police officer he had met previously stopped by. The visit was casual, not official, as the officer had heard about the neighborhood tension and wanted to check in. The man welcomed them, offering a seat by the pool. They spoke candidly about life, community, and perception. The officer admitted that the call from the neighbor had initially seemed justified, but after meeting him, everything had changed. The man listened attentively, offering a thoughtful perspective on how fear and assumption could cloud judgment. He didn't lecture or criticize. He simply shared insights from his own life, using calmness and clarity to convey lessons in a way that invited reflection rather than defensiveness. The neighbor, still visible across the street, seemed to watch more closely now. Their expression had softened, though traces of shame lingered. They began to realize that the man's actions were deliberate, a way of showing strength without aggression. He didn't need to prove anything. His life, his composure, and his presence spoke for themselves. It was a quiet form of empowerment, one that made assumptions crumble without a single harsh word. Slowly, the neighbor began to understand that respect and dignity could command far more authority than anger or confrontation ever could. The afternoon brought a small gathering of friends to the mansion. They were close companions, people who appreciated thoughtful conversation and calm environments. The man prepared light refreshments and welcomed them warmly, moving through the house with a natural ease. Laughter and conversation filled the rooms, but there was also a quiet depth in every interaction. It was clear to everyone that this was a home built not just on wealth but on effort, discipline, and a commitment to living with integrity. His friends marveled at the atmosphere, noting how peaceful and welcoming it felt. From across the street, the neighbor watched quietly. The gathering was not ostentatious or showy. It was genuine, warm, and inclusive. The neighbor felt a mixture of emotions: curiosity, awe, and a faint realization that their own assumptions had been entirely misplaced. They had expected confrontation, drama, or evidence of wrongdoing. What they saw instead was a man living his life with grace, confidence, and kindness. It was a subtle but profound lesson, one that challenged them to reconsider their perspective and perhaps change the way they approached others in the future. The day continued with small, meaningful moments. The man and his friends walked through the garden, admired the flowers, and listened to the fountain's gentle sound. Conversation flowed naturally, covering topics from daily life to broader reflections about patience, understanding, and personal growth. The atmosphere was calm yet vibrant, a perfect balance that mirrored the values the man held dear. Even the smallest gestures, like offering a drink or sharing a story, carried a sense of purpose and care. Every action reflected the composure and dignity that defined him. As evening approached, the sunlight softened, casting long shadows and creating a serene ambiance. The gathering concluded and the friends left, leaving the mansion peaceful once again. The man walked to the edge of the pool, looking across the street at the neighbor who still lingered, watching. He smiled, a gesture that carried warmth without judgment. It was an acknowledgement of awareness and reflection, a quiet way of showing that understanding could emerge without confrontation. The neighbor, sensing the calm authority in the gesture, began to shift internally. The lessons of patience, dignity, and composure were slowly taking root. Night fell and the neighborhood quieted. Lights flickered on in nearby homes and the gentle hum of the evening filled the air. The man settled near the pool, reflecting on the day. He thought about how assumptions had led to tension, how patience and composure had diffused it, and how subtle lessons could influence people without force or argument. He understood that empowerment often came not from asserting dominance, but from living in alignment with one's values, demonstrating dignity, and allowing actions to speak louder than words. Across the street, the neighbor closed their blinds slowly, their mind full of reflection. They couldn't deny the impression left by the man's quiet strength, the way he handled challenging situations without anger, and the calm confidence that permeated every action. There was discomfort, yes, but also a growing recognition that change was possible, that assumptions could be questioned, and that understanding required humility. It was a subtle internal transformation, one that would likely take time but had begun nonetheless. Before retiring for the night, the man walked once more through his garden. The fountain glimmered under the soft glow of outdoor lights. Flowers swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the air carried a soothing calm. He reflected on the past days, appreciating the lessons he had reinforced not only for himself but also, indirectly, for the people around him. Life was filled with moments where patience, dignity, and thoughtful action could quietly shift perceptions and create lasting impressions. The power of composure and integrity was something that needed no proclamation. It was evident in every thoughtful choice and careful action. Finally, he returned inside, feeling a deep sense of peace. The mansion, the pool, the garden, and the quiet neighborhood were more than just physical spaces. They were symbols of the life he had built, the values he held, and the lessons he lived every day. He settled into his evening routine, preparing for the night and reflecting on the day's experiences. It had been a day of subtle victories, quiet empowerment, and meaningful reflection. The man knew that true strength lay in how one conducted oneself, and he had once again demonstrated that dignity, patience, and composure could turn moments of tension into opportunities for understanding and growth. Life was rarely simple, but it was in these ordinary yet extraordinary moments that character shone brightest. The sun rose gently over the quiet neighborhood, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns and sparkling houses. The man awoke as he usually did, feeling calm and centered. He had spent the past few days navigating a tense situation with grace and composure, and now there was a sense of completion in the air. He moved through the mansion with ease, taking in the familiar surroundings, the polished floors, the sunlit pool, and the well-tended garden. Every corner of the house reflected years of hard work, dedication, and patience. This home wasn't just a structure. It was a testament to perseverance and a reminder of how far he had come. He began the morning with his usual routine. After a refreshing shower, he dressed simply and stepped into the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread filled the space, creating a comforting atmosphere. As he sipped his coffee, he reflected on the events of the past week. The neighbor who had called the police had acted out of fear and prejudice, making assumptions without understanding the situation. But the man had chosen to respond not with anger or confrontation, but with patience, dignity, and calmness. That choice had transformed a tense moment into an opportunity for reflection, not just for the neighbor, but also for the officers and anyone who observed the events unfold. He decided to spend some time in the pool, letting the cool water ease his mind and body. The morning air was fresh, carrying the scent of flowers and the faint rustle of leaves in the garden. Floating on his back, he closed his eyes and felt the water support him, allowing him to release tension and focus on clarity. The pool had always been a place of peace, a sanctuary where he could think without distraction and process his thoughts calmly. Today, he reflected not only on his own journey, but also on the subtle ways people's perceptions could change when faced with truth and composure. Across the street, the neighbor remained in their house observing quietly. Their perspective had begun to shift over the past few days. They had watched the man handle situations with quiet authority, never showing anger or frustration, yet always maintaining control and dignity. The neighbor felt a mixture of unease and admiration. Their assumptions had been proven wrong, and it was a difficult feeling to face. But deep down they knew the man's behavior carried a lesson. Fear and prejudice could be overcome not through confrontation but through example. Slowly they began to reflect on their own biases and the importance of giving people the benefit of the doubt. By late morning, the man had returned to his home office. He had work to attend to, including reviewing documents and planning upcoming business decisions. Sitting at his desk, he carefully examined every detail, ensuring that his plans were precise and thorough. Success had not come easily, and he valued the discipline required to manage it effectively. As he worked, he considered how the events with the neighbor and the officers had reinforced the importance of patience, empathy, and calmness in dealing with others. Life often tested character in small, ordinary moments, and how one responded in those moments could leave lasting impressions. Later, the man decided to host a small gathering of friends in his garden. It was a simple affair, meant to enjoy conversation and connection rather than show off wealth. He prepared light refreshments, setting the table near the pool where sunlight reflected off the water and created a serene ambiance. Friends arrived, bringing laughter and warmth that filled the space. Conversation flowed easily, touching on work, life, and shared experiences. The man's calm and welcoming demeanor set the tone, making everyone feel at ease and respected. The atmosphere was a reflection of the life he had built, peaceful, thoughtful, and full of intentionality. From across the street, the neighbor observed the gathering again. They noticed the genuine warmth, the laughter, and the sense of community. It was strikingly different from the assumptions they had made. The man was not threatening, nor was he arrogant or boastful. He was confident, composed, and gracious. The neighbor felt a mixture of guilt and admiration, realizing how much their own fear and prejudice had influenced their perception. The events had created a subtle but powerful lesson, that dignity and integrity could speak louder than words, and that actions often reveal character more truthfully than assumptions. The day continued with small, meaningful moments. The man and his friends walked through the garden, admired the flowers, and enjoyed the gentle sound of the fountain. Conversations touched on personal growth, resilience, and understanding human behavior. It was a day that reinforced the value of patience, empathy, and composure. The man understood that true influence came not from confrontation or proving others wrong, but from living authentically and consistently embodying one's values. His actions had shown others, including the neighbor, the power of calm confidence and thoughtful behavior. As afternoon turned to evening, the sunlight softened, casting warm hues across the mansion and garden. The friends departed, leaving the space quiet and serene. The man walked to the edge of the pool, reflecting on the events of the past week. The tension and assumptions that had sparked a minor incident had been transformed into moments of clarity and understanding. The neighbor had begun to reflect on their own biases. The officers had observed the man's dignity firsthand, and the man himself had reinforced his commitment to living with composure and patience. It was a subtle yet profound series of lessons that demonstrated how character could influence those around him without confrontation. The night settled in, bringing cool air and gentle sounds of the neighborhood. The man sat by the pool, letting the quiet calm envelop him. He thought about how assumptions could lead to fear, how prejudice could blind people to reality, and how small acts of patience and integrity could create meaningful change. His mind wandered through the events of the past days, appreciating the subtle victories. Moments where understanding had replaced fear, and dignity had replaced confrontation. Life, he knew, was filled with opportunities like these to influence others through calm, thoughtful action. Across the street, the neighbor closed their blinds slowly, reflecting on the lessons they had witnessed. Their assumptions had been challenged, their fear confronted by evidence of patience, composure, and integrity. They felt a quiet shift within themselves, an acknowledgement that their initial judgment had been flawed. While change would take time, the seed of understanding had been planted. It was a moment of introspection that could lead to growth, empathy, and a reconsideration of how they approached others in the future. As the evening deepened, the man walked once more through his garden. The fountain sparkled under the soft glow of outdoor lights. The flowers swayed gently, and the air was filled with calm. He reflected on the subtle power of example, on how living with dignity and composure could influence people without a single harsh word. Each step along the garden path reminded him that life's challenges often arrived unexpectedly, but how one responded defined the impact of those moments. He felt content, knowing that he had handled a difficult situation with grace, leaving a quiet yet lasting impression on those around him. Before retiring for the night, the man returned inside feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The mansion, pool, and garden were more than just physical spaces. They were symbols of the life he had built and the values he lived by every day. The events of the past week had provided subtle lessons not only to the neighbor and the officers, but also to himself. They reinforced the importance of patience, empathy, and the quiet strength that comes from living authentically and with integrity. The day had ended with reflection, understanding, and the knowledge that dignity and composure could transform tension into opportunity. As he settled into his evening routine, he felt a calm confidence about the future. Life would continue to present challenges, misunderstandings, and moments where assumptions could create tension, but he knew that by approaching each situation with patience, empathy, and dignity, he could influence the world around him positively. The quiet power of example had been demonstrated, and its effects, though subtle, were lasting. He smiled, feeling content that he had navigated the past days successfully and with integrity. The neighborhood, now quiet under the soft glow of streetlights, seemed peaceful and familiar. The man reflected on the subtle ways life taught lessons, the importance of self-awareness and the value of composure in the face of misunderstanding. He felt gratitude for the journey that had brought him here, for the wisdom gained through experience and for the ability to turn tension into reflection. With a final glance at the pool and garden, he embraced the calm of the evening, knowing that life's challenges could be met with patience, grace, and quiet confidence. And with that, he prepared to rest, ready to face tomorrow with the same integrity and composure that had guided him through today.